I know Brad had a good
It's like, what are you catching?
Randy was a baseball and football player. He'll catch them all.
You know what, though? Oops. I'll turn my mic off. Little special workshop. And this morning, as we get started, we've asked Brad Daniels to open us in prayer. Thank you, Brad, and lead us in the pledge.
You bet. Mayor and Council. Lord, we just appreciate the opportunity to come here this morning and just serve our community. Lord, you've given these members great responsibility. They carry a lot of weight, and we're sensitive to that. They have to make tough decisions, and at times those aren't popular. But Lord, we know that their hearts are in the right place, that they're doing the best they can for the city, and we thank them for that. We just pray that you would be over them as they make decisions this morning, and that those decisions would be a benefit to us and a benefit to you. And we thank you for all the blessings you've given this city. In your name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brad. Let's open with roll call.
Rodriguez? Here. Bruner? Here. Bangula?
Here.
Reynolds?
Here.
Haverfield?
Here.
And Bauer is absent.
So this morning, as we all know, our workshops are discussion. And so we have several discussion items this morning. We're going to start with a discussion regarding the allocation of the Republic Services, how we use the Republic Services gas rebate that we have been really privileged to receive the last several years. This year, the amount is approximately $76,000. And so I just wanted to, I didn't come with a whole list of suggestions. I just wanted to talk to the council about it. It is something, I think in the past we were like 65,000, I think last year. One year we were 50,000. So a couple things. In the past, we have used the Republic Services, this gas rebate that we've received for Nampa Shares and Cares. One year, the very first year, we used it to fund a grocery shuttle. We used it, I believe it was last year, that we used it to help offset the cost of what we were hoping to have as the Christmas lights downtown, dedicated it to that. But it didn't go, we weren't able to get those done because they were so incredibly expensive. But it did go towards downtown and the sound system and some other projects downtown. So this year, as we have it again, I just wanted to say, I'd like us to think about where it would like to go. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with Adam Mancini, who's our forester, arborist, whichever way we say, I should say that, but with the city of Nampa, and you do such an amazing job, Adam. And we were in a meeting talking about some challenges that we're facing across the city with trees that are a nuisance, that need to be removed, that are not on an individual's property. And over years, we've had a number of those come forward. Recently, we've had a really challenging one. And one of the recommendations that I would like to make is that we set up possibly $15,000 in a fund, and we'd have to figure out how to fund it on an ongoing basis, that would be overseen by the tree committee. Adam, do you want to come forward, because you'll, I don't want to say it, your tree committee, remind me of
Mayor.
who
Yes.
that is.
So as we discussed yesterday, and we can discuss
Yeah, we'll just
casually
have a
about
talk.
this. There was conversation about some challenges that we've had in the years past, and I've brought this up with our tree board. And a lot of times, so the responsibilities of the trees in the right-of-way are the adjacent property owners. And oftentimes, the adjacent property owners are not either aware of the city code and their requirements and their responsibilities, or they don't have the amount of finances and resources to pay for the maintenance or removal of trees in the right-of-way. So oftentimes, we're challenged with it when a tree has become dead in the right-of-way that's not physically on the property owner's property, it's on the right-of-way, but being that the responsibility is on them, they don't have the funds to remove or mitigate the hazard of that dead tree. So that poses a challenge with us in the city because Parks and Forestry, we don't have the resources to go and mitigate all these problems. Now, if it's immediate threat, we will step in, and the forestry crew will come in and remove the hazard and mitigate the hazard. But when it's not an imminent hazard, we put it back on the property owner. Now, as Mayor was alluding to, we face this very often and more often than I'd like to mention. And the challenge that I feel uncomfortable with is when I pose this challenge to the resident or the property owner, there is no program in place within the city of Nampa to help this resident with this problem. And oftentimes these costs can go up $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 depending on the size of the tree or trees that are under concern. So as Mayor and I were discussing this yesterday, it was great dialogue, and the use of this fund would be fantastic because it would provide a service to the citizens, and it would resolve, essentially kind of resolve a problem that we have. Now, it wouldn't take care of everyone's trees, but it would be a start. And I would like to welcome your conversation and questions and discussion about it and consideration for this use of this fund.
And one thing we discussed yesterday was that Boise actually maintains and is responsible for the trees in the right-of-way.
Correct.
And Meridian is like us where we're not. And so it's become recently kind of challenging, especially in a given situation that Adam's been dealing with, where we have no resolution for it. So one thought was maybe setting aside $15,000 and letting the tree board determine when to allocate it and when not to. And this, so that the tree board there would be a board that's already in place that we could just utilize in this situation. So it was just a thought I wanted to throw out. Yes.
Mayor, just questioning that, and from hearing from Adam, that may be 3 or 4 trees that you could, $15,000 I'm talking about. So how do you keep that fund in place where there's actually, because it's not an endowment, and at 4.5% or 5%, you're not going to build $15,000 up very much by keeping the principal in place. So I guess I see that that's a short-term, immediate type, but I don't see it as a long-term solution.
Yes, great question, Councilman Bruner. So we discussed that as well, and we were discussing options and ideas to try to sustain this fund and maintain it and continue to build it. And Darren had a great suggestion where we could potentially look at using some scholarship funds and establishing it through the scholarship fund that the Parks and Rec has established. So we already have that in place, and it would be a great way to try to create some funding revenues and channel some funding into that with that
Yeah, I can see. If you had a principal of $100,000 and then you just kept that, and then the interest, maybe you'd have one tree until it kept building up, but $5,000 to utilize. But that'd be, to me, it wouldn't be immediate
Correct.
solution, but it'd be maybe a long term as that builds up.
And there's also the conversation where if for some reason, like for example, the LED program, if for some reason there was no applicants or there was no money available, in this case, we didn't have money available for that year, that would be, we would put people on a waiting list maybe for the following year when we did have funding available to have that opportunity to still give them something that we can provide a service to them and an opportunity.
So, Mayor, quick. So, if you have an immediate danger where forestry comes in, and so where do you get those funds from? Where do you pull those funds?
The city just does it to mitigate a hazard, an immediate hazard.
Out of their budget.
Okay, so it's not covered by insurance or anything of that sort.
No, it's simply, we're just utilizing our resources. We don't really have any incurred direct costs. It's our equipment and our manpower that goes and does the work, and typically it takes anywhere from an hour to half a day to mitigate a hazard, sometimes in cooperation with street department if we have to close a lane down. But we feel like that's That's very important to make sure the public's safe. And if it's an immediate threat, I feel like it's our duty to take on that responsibility. But when it's not imminent and immediate threat, we like to educate the citizens, the adjacent property owners, of their responsibilities and try to encourage them to mitigate the hazard. And I would say half the time I get cooperation and people are willing to do it and happy to do it and don't realize their responsibilities. The other half the time might be where people simply don't have the funds and aren't aware of their responsibilities.
So Mayor, I'm in favor of this as long as there's some long-term type solution, and if Darren's going to help out with the scholarship funds or whatever. The other aspect, Amy does such a good job with surveys, and not to load her up, but is there any reason why we can't put maybe 5 or 6 different possibilities out there to the public and have them respond?
Would you like to answer that, Amy? You can just do it from there, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to do that, and I have seen in other communities grants even for neighborhoods that they could possibly submit ideas that they might have to improve their neighborhood. So I would love to create some opportunities for more community engagement and feedback. Thank you.
Good. Any other thoughts?
Mayor Kling.
Victor Rodriguez and then Randy Haverfield, yes.
I think this is a good idea. This is a good project for us. So thank you, Adam.
Absolutely.
I'm also going to ask that yesterday, the senior board had a meeting, and the way they fund themselves is by donations and also by the Treasure Valley, I think they call it co-op, where they are federally supported by funds. This year, the funds have been reduced quite a bit. So they're up against the wall, and as far as their budget. And I asked the board to meet with either with you and I, Mayor, or with Doug, and figure out how we can help them, supplement them a little bit. And I said this would be a good project for that. So I'm not sure exact price what they're going to need to come up with. Either they increase the meals, which they don't want to do, but going to have to, I think, and also to pay for their. They've had to dip into their savings to pay for the employees. So I'm not sure what to do about that. And I think when I told them yesterday that we need to step up and help them, so I have 2 opportunities. I've met with Matt Jameson, and he's going to meet with the board, I think, next week to figure out what he can do. But that's only money allotted for administrative. It's not for capital improvements or for purchase of food. So that's what's going up. That's what's really going up. And so they don't know what they're going to do. And I think thinking of them in between, oh boy, 5 to 10,000, maybe, that would help a lot. So if you just keep that in the back of your mind, Mayor, that's an important thing there for the seniors. I'd say they don't complain, but they're scrapping. They don't know what to do. So I said, well, let's figure something out. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's actually why we wanted to come before you today, was to get you thinking about opportunities and options, and then we can come back after we get feedback. But Councilman Haverfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to mention, I was approached by the general manager of Republic Services about their being a part of a timber reclamation association along with Timber Creek Recycling. So I was wondering if they approached me about the ability to recycle some of that product back through maybe local businesses that they can use it for manufacturing. And in this case, what they approached me about was furniture, because my son's involved with that. So I would just ask that you reach out to Timber Creek, Mike Mergosio over there, and then Bob Bennett with Republic, and see if we can maybe partner with them as far as on an effort that you're trying to create, so that there's more entities maybe involved with a public-private partnership to it as well.
Thank you, Councilman Haverfield. I've established quite a strong relationship with Timber Creek Recycling already, and they've already offered to generously donate 500 cubic yards of their recycled mulch, which we're in a shortage of when we'd like to use it in our parks and facilities. We've also discussed, I'm part of the Urban Wood Network, which is what part of Mike and Timber Creek Recycling is aware of and part of. We've had very in-depth, intimate discussions about his passion for recycling, reclaiming this product and not going into the landfill. And we've also been discussing and working out options to bring our wood waste to him, and he provides us with a quality mulch that we can then reuse. So there has been a lot of dialogue and discussion, and we have a good relationship. And I'm also part of a nonprofit called the Treasure Valley Canopy Network. And within the Canopy Network, the Urban Wood Network is also part of, so I'm the president of this nonprofit. So we have a good relationship with a lot of different businesses and a lot of opportunities to create, open the door for sustainability and recycling and reclaiming products.
Good. It's basically what I wanted to see, if you had that already established in place. It's good to support local business.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for the suggestion.
Isn't it nice when you ask a question and you hear that, yep, we're there, we're on it. So thank you for being on it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. So one other comment came in the chat, and that was a public art fund, a donation to a public art fund. So we will be gathering, if the council could send their suggestions to our office, Amy may send a question out for ideas, and then we'll come back together and present something. If you guys have any other ideas, they'll bring it forward.
Mayor Kling, would you
Yes.
like to have, would you like to see a budget from the senior citizens? And
Yes.
would that help at all, or?
I think it would really help, especially if there's a budget shortfall. But with Matt Jamison sitting down with them, that is absolutely the first step, because there could be CDBG funds available to them because of the work that they do.
Right.
Yeah,
But-
and
but-
I know they've increased their rates
They have.
from 5 to 6, and their to-go is 8 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's, yeah,
The thing I worry about CBG is that you can't use that money for the purchase of food,
right,
and that's where we're having a difficulty.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, I'll submit that.
Thank you, thank you. All righty,
Thank you, Mayor and
you.
Council.
appreciate you being here this morning. Okay, well, let's move on to our next discussion item, which is the townhouse parking that Rodney's going to present to us this morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. There we go. So just give a quick little history. We've had a few, this should be pretty quick, but we've had a few townhouse developments come before you, and we've found that there's just little to no guest parking associated with that. They have the standard requirement for single family. They are a single family type development. And so the standard 2 parking spaces per unit is what gets applied to these. And there's a couple of challenges with doing that. The lots are typically smaller, and so we don't have as much room on the lot to provide additional parking. So typically in a single-family development, detached home, you'll get probably more like 4 parking spaces, 2 out in front of the garage, and then 2 in the garage. That's a typical situation. But because these are smaller, they're not providing that same amount of parking. There's just not the space on the lot. And then second of all, because they're narrower, and because they share a lot line, there's not a lot of yard space out in front. And so that prevents the ability for on-street parking because the lots are so narrow. So because of those two things, we feel like there may be a need to adjust our parking standards for townhouse developments. So at the direction of the mayor, staff is bringing 2 options plus one that may be applied to both situations for council to consider. And based on this direction, we'll bring it back to you with a zoning code amendment. First go to P and Z and then to you. So the first one that I suggested is to just match the multiple family residential parking. Here on the screen is that standard. So it'd be based on number of beds, plus as we worked with Councilwoman Jangula on this one, the 0.25 spaces per dwelling unit for guest parking. So those would have to be separate from just the lot. They'd have to be on their own lot or away from the home. So you could apply those same standards for townhouse developments. The challenge here is that if you only had one-bedroom townhouses, you would only be down to 1.5 plus 0.25 for each guest parking space. So then the next option was to keep the single-family dwelling standards of 2 per dwelling unit, but add an additional 0.25, or we could go greater if that's your desire, spaces for guest parking. And then the last one I added on was just a kind of a standard that would apply to either one of those two, that we require the guest parking be placed within a specific distance from the unit. So we're not sticking the guest parking clear back in the back corner, not really utilized, that it's within a certain distance. So those are the couple of options plus the third kind of standard that we could apply. And I'm just looking for council direction, and then I can bring this back to you in a zoning text amendment.
Any thoughts from council?
I love it. I like the idea of the second option better than the first one, so more of single family.
Any other? Yes, Councilman Haverfield.
The fact that this is a townhouse development, is that why you don't have ADA parking spaces separate from the guest parking?
Correct, because it's single family, we don't require that.
Yes.
The second is fine, the third, I think, I mean, who's going to be accountable for guest parking if it's way in
Yeah.
that 40? I mean, that makes no sense. No one
Right.
can park there. I'm sorry, people just don't walk in.
Doro, could you turn your, thank you.
So people just don't, walk. So I don't think there's any, you may as well not have extra parking if it's going to be in the
Yeah.
far left 40 over there.
Sorry, when I said, yeah, I meant the first one. Mimic whatever single family dwelling is plus the additional 2.25.
So I should have numbered these, I'm sorry. Number 2 is actually the orange one. So
Single family,
number
single-
1
Okay, so yes.
is this one.
You're number 1 or 2?
2.
Yeah. So 2 and then 3 essentially would go with that.
Would be an add-on to it? Okay.
Personally, I think there's no question that it needs to be the single-family dwelling. The other is way too small. I think it should be 0.5, which is just 0.5. I mean, it would take 4 units to get 1 parking spot, and that is not enough. I just think about where I live. There is actually almost 1 for 1. And for us to do a quarter for 1 dwelling, that's not enough. It just, there's no way it would be enough. I think we ought to be single-family dwelling, of 2 dwelling, for 2 cars. You've got 2 in your garage, 2 on your pad, and there should be 0.5 as a minimum. To me, that is a bare minimum, because it's really not enough.
Mayor, just an example, if I may, what's on Flamingo there, is it Flamingo and Casher? Wherever you go down Flamingo, there's all those apartments, you know what I'm talking about, across from the,
I don't
they're
drive that
always
very
parked along. I mean, I realize that's a pretty wide street, Flamingo.
Flamingo and
Cassia?
Okay.
Okay, so as an example, do we have any idea what were the requirements for that development?
yeah, so the requirement is 2 spaces per dwelling unit. That's the current standard.
So they must just have a lot of other people living there and extra, because there's parking on the
Could.
street constantly.
Yeah. And again, some of that is, I can't think of the situation you're talking about exactly, but if it's too far away, then the parking's not utilized. So that's one of the concerns. But then also, if they fill up their garage with things, then they don't use it, and then it goes out onto the roadway too. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're just, those units, those who are, the extra folks who are living there are parking there because then they just walk through the grass and
Yeah.
and around to their unit rather than parking internally somewhere far away, so, yeah.
yeah.
You know, one thought I have is that we have a population that's saying, please stop growing, right? So, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'm sorry I repeat myself, but we have a finite amount of ground. We don't have to be growing. We don't have to be just saying, hey, everybody come and well, you can do whatever you want to do. We should be developing with really nice, great developments because it won't be that long and our ground is gone. And we don't get to go back and redo it. Everything that we put in here is going to be here for the next 100 years. And so I don't know why we don't create a high standard for what we have here in our community. I don't think we should be at the base minimums. I think we should be having great requirements and expecting great developments because we're going to get what we ask for. So I think 0.5 is a minimum, and I think we should be setting high standards for our community.
So Mayor, just, so help me with this. So if they have a garage and there's no way of making them accountable, whether they have a space for a car in the garage.
Right.
So I guess my question is putting out there, should we even count a garage as a parking space?
It's hard.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's, you know, so I guess well, from what the mayor said, it kind of woke me up a little bit this morning, 4 places and you have half a park, I think almost you need at least one. Yeah, or two for every 4 single units, so, yeah. I just think some of these spaces, and that's why I voted differently in some areas, is we just are trying to put too much. And I realize from a developer standpoint, that totally makes sense because it's finances. The more you can put in a finite space, the more it's going to be, as far as financially beneficial to them. But I just think we're trying to, in these spaces, we need to fill in the infill and so on, but we're trying to put too much in them and allowing that to happen at times, so.
And if we have great developments that we have accounted for the street, right, improvements, traffic improvements, and they're willing to put those traffic improvements in and account for their parking spaces, I think we're going to have less opposition to the density that we need to be moving to, because we need to move to greater density, but we need to do it well. Otherwise, we're sprawling out. So if we can achieve the density but do it well, then I think hopefully we have less opposition to the density because we've accounted for making sure that the street improvements are done, that we have enough parking on site so it isn't doing what we've,
So Mayor, I see a lot of head nods on these two on the screen right now, except with the 0.5 instead of the 0.25. So I think that's what I'll bring back to council for your consideration.
Mayor, yeah, I like the 0.5 with what Mayor said, but just out of curiosity, what are neighboring municipalities requiring? Do you know?
It's typically 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like 0.5.
But again, a market sometimes will drive that to be more, which is obvious when you see a single-family residential development, detached homes. They'll typically put 4 or 5, depending on the development, so, yeah.
awesome. Are we good? Good. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you, Rodney. Appreciate your work on that. Good morning, Lauren. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a presentation on our grants. I tell you what, the job that Lauren, thank you for your work. It's a lot of work.
There's been a lot of opportunity this past year.
It's a good way to put it.
Give me just a moment to share my screen. All right, so we're here to discuss public works and federal grants. I have a print off of the next slide for you guys, so.
We can just pass it down. Thank you.
So we have pursued a lot this past year. It has been a big year of change with all of the extra funding that has come through the state and through the federal government, the opportunities that have been available. And in the past year, we presented a lot to council for various opportunities. First, we'll go through those opportunities and what our FY22 year looked like for grants. Then we're going to go through the introduction of the federal programs, what Justice 40 is, how it affects those pursuits, and what NAMPA's demographics kind of look like, and in relation to Justice 40 and how we use those metrics in relation to federal grants. And we're also going to identify how NAMPA aligns with those federal goals, because they use a lot of words that have certain meanings attributed to them, but that's not all that they mean. So for FY22, this summary of grants that you have available to you is not all-inclusive. There are some local programs that are not included on here because they have different stipulations, basically, and don't necessarily pertain to all of the things that we're going to be reviewing today. And it's a big thank you to everybody at Public Works and everybody at Council for everything that we achieved here in FY22. As you know, you approved all of this, and we were awarded $17.2 million so far, with $20.8 million still pending in potential award. Do you have any questions about any of the projects before I move on to the federal programs? Okay, that's the easy part.
And I will say it's a lot to take in really quickly. So what I would recommend is for the FY22, so these are the ones that just are behind us. That's all that is.
Yes.
So if you have any questions about those after the meeting, feel free to let Lauren know, and she'd be happy to answer any questions.
And we're always available to myself, and then of course Crystal and Jeff, and to specific project questions and everything, so.
Lauren and Mayor, one comment. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Lauren. I believe that if we get to a point where we have over $30 or $35 million in federal grants, we kind of step into a new realm where we have additional reporting requirements necessary by the federal government for the amount of grants we're receiving. We're not there yet, but if we get there, it becomes a new level of work for finance and the departments to track and maintain the various federal grants.
That's a good point. And something I didn't think to speak to on that point is that we're actually requesting indirect costs with a lot of these applications. So that's an option for us, and we include that on the budget cost. And it is a 10% charge that every time we would invoice for reimbursement, we would have a 10% charged for those indirect costs that would go right back to administration.
So does that have to do with the LTAC, us taking on the LTAC responsibility, or that's separate from that?
It's separate from that.
Separate from that, okay.
And so technically there is a federal percentage, and that is the 10%. But then there is the ability to go through a formal process and adopt an indirect percentage specific to the municipality, or we could piggyback on ITDs, but ITDs is also 10%. And really, it would be creating a lot of administration on our end for probably the same result. So we just go with the federal 10% that we're allowed.
Is that new?
It
Us
is
going
not.
after that? Have we been going after it?
Well, we were not going after these federal grants prior to 2019. So it's kind of all new to us, but it's not necessarily new to the programs. Though a lot of programs have opened up to municipalities that weren't previously.
Thank you. Okay, so you can go on, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what are federal goals of equity, environmental justice, underserved, disadvantaged populations? These are the key words that they're using when they're talking about this topic. I chose this graphic to explain inequality, equity, equality, and justice because it is so prevalent. It is presented time and time again as an example. So it just kind of fit, again, that these are the goals that they're looking at. This is the perspective that the federal government issues. So what does that mean for us? So what is Justice 40? Justice 40 is actually a law. It was introduced as a part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It is also included in the Inflation Act and the American Rescue Plan. So it is basically providing environmental justice, which is the sum of your environment, your social environment, your economic environment, bringing that justice to 40% of the disadvantaged population in America. So that is their goal and that is their intent through Justice 40. Then there is a lot of other details that is available, but I wanted to kind of read a bit here. It's Justice 40 initiative is not a one-time investment or nor a single pot of money. Rather, it is a series of changes to improve how government ensures equitable distribution of the benefits of many programs, existing and new programs. They're covered by the Justice 40 initiative if they meet eligibility requirements. Now, the thing there is that pretty much everything meets eligibility requirements. So all of the federal funding that we pursued this last year, all the federal funding we will be pursuing in the future, it is all under the Justice 40 umbrella. It basically has been since the bill was released, the bipartisan infrastructure law. It has been worked into every funding program that the federal government has. And not just one way or another, but pretty much cumulatively, all aspects of it are now into consideration for these programs. And they say Justice 40 initiative was established to confront and address decades of underinvestment in burdened communities. And they have points to climate change, clean energy and energy efficiency, racial equity, reducing barriers to opportunity, working and labor standards, clean transportation, affordable and sustainable housing, training and workforce development, legacy pollution, clean water infrastructure, and climate change in relation to environmental justice. There are a lot of details I could go into that, but for now, I wanted to talk about how Justice 40 affects federal funding pursuits. We have to explain how do we meet these metrics? What are we serving here in Nampa? And does that look like transportation impacts? Is it literal barriers? Is it non-tangible barriers? What does our population need and what do those metrics look like? So what does Nampa look like through the Justice 40 filter? It can mean several things, and they have several tools available to us. On the screen now is kind of a copy of the DOT's disadvantaged populations and persistent poverty mapping tool. They have all these mapping tools. We go in and we select the area that the project is going to take place in. If we have to use city statistics, we can go to the census. We also can use county statistics if we have a broader scope. But generally, it will track for us if it's persistent poverty, if it's disadvantaged community, and it will give us those metrics. The EPA also has what they're calling the EJ screen, an environmental justice index tool that provides various metrics that you can review. Not all of them pertain to what we do at Public Works. This one shows like traffic proximity, and anything that is highlighted in a color says that we're above the national average for negative impacts. So we use this data to reinforce why we are seeking our funding.
I just, if you
Yes.
don't mind, I have a question. So what are you talking about, a poverty area or what?
It is all built on national averages. So it's a good and bad thing for Nampa. It's a good thing in that we qualify for a lot of metrics because national comparison, we're still very much a rural community compared to a lot of the nation. So they look at the national averages and these percentiles are based on that. And did that answer the question?
It just, well, it does, but I was wondering how we determine that. But the second thing is, what do you do with it?
They have lots of formulas. We've asked in workshops and they've kind of explained it, but it is very still inconclusive how they fully determined all of the various metrics and what they decided to put in. Most of it comes from the census data as well as additional metrics that the government basically pulls regularly. And a lot of this is updated on a monthly basis. Some of it's updated on a quarterly basis. And go ahead.
So if I could add to that. So the census tracts, the census tract 201, 203, and I can't remember if it was 204, 202. Anyway, there were a couple on the screen earlier. Those are the same census tracts that were identified when we worked. We did an assessment, and it was a community assessment, oh my goodness, like 8 years ago. when I was at the chamber was when it all began, and that's when we started our Healthy Nampa impact, because those particular census tracts, and it is through census data, showed the level of poverty because they have income. But also it shows that that diabetes, obesity, several of the key, are they called comorbidities, the things that, where we're not healthy, right, are present in those tracts. And so it's been around for a long time as far as the tracking of the census data tracking at that track level, that track 201, et cetera. We have some others. Our poverty levels have increased. So maybe I'm saying that wrong. We're doing better. Let's say it that way. We're doing better. Fewer people at the same level of poverty because wages have gone up, but we still qualify. And that's why we get the CDBG funding that we get. It's based on a lot of factors that influence a lot. It's complex.
Yes.
Mayor, just a quick comment.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing a lot is that when we're receiving any degree of federal funding, the federal government generally tries to put guidelines on how you spend that money and where you spend that money. And they're trying to guide it to the areas which, in their view, needs it the most, which would be the lower income, the older parts of the city that might need that revenue more than a newer part of the city. So they tend to put language in that tries to direct that spend and criteria with which you can judge it. And then you frequently are required to report back to the federal government on how you spent that money and how you justified spending it where you did.
It's interesting to see it land in the transportation world, which is a little newer, I think, with the
Yes.
Justice 40. That isn't the way it used to be. And I know we've had concerns over some of the language, which is why Lauren's talking about this today. You'll probably get to this, but 2 questions is, are there certain requirements that tie us to something that we would want to be concerned about? And then, and you may get to this also, a lot of our growth is in new growth areas, not in these areas, and that's where we need transportation funding. So hopefully there's a way that we qualify in the census tract area that is really it's an older area, and yes, we need improvements, but a lot of our growth is outside of that area.
So Mayor, I know we have had some grants, but for our older areas as far as infrastructure, and since we just went through the irrigation lines that are breaking and so on. So does any of this type in our older areas, does that cover that type of infrastructure? Or when we're mainly talking about transportation, I mean, that doesn't affect that, but.
I'm not just talking about transportation. This is for water resources as well. The hiccup there is that there is not as much funding available for water resources. There's a lot of loan opportunity, but there's not as much just grant funding. And then the grant funding that is available isn't necessarily for aging infrastructure. They consider those maintenance and operation costs. So they're a lot harder to fund.
So M&O is not included? Okay.
More often than not. And more programs are coming out for water resources. The infrastructure law bill very much focused on transportation. But with the Inflation Act, there was more money put towards water projects. And so there's some programs that have come out through EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation that look really promising, that we're hopeful that there might be some opportunity there.
Thank you for answering our questions.
Yeah. And then kind of speaking to what you both had to say, Mr. Rodriguez or Councilman Rodriguez and Mayor Kling, is that this data is used to basically fill our argument as why we're justified in requesting this funding and how we're going to utilize it to serve that population. So when we went for the RAISE grant, we used the DOT's tool to identify the metrics that they had. But in addition to that, we had research that like 60% of the population didn't have access to vehicles and other data such as that we used to support our argument of why the improvements are necessary and important to our community.
Well, Mayor, so would that entail business development as well? For example, the north side doesn't have any kind of grocery stores over there other than, I think, Walmart and a co-op. But that's part of the development of the lower income. Does that reach into that at all?
Not as far as what Public Works can achieve, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay.
So we can try to get them access to the nearest grocery store, but we don't have any funding or ability to kind of work towards developing an area that could house such a
Well,
business.
and that also involves with a pedestrian and bicycle, right?
One last thing on these screens is, again, to Mayor Kling's point, is kind of that it also provides information about like asthma and heart disease. What you see here is asthma, and it's not something that necessarily relates to Public Works grant pursuits, but I wanted to present it as another example of what those metrics look like. And so then, how does Public Works contribute to the well-being of the community already? Again, in relation to the environmental justice narrative that the federal government would like us to provide to them whenever we're submitting these grants. Again, that's a social, environmental, and economic impact, and they look at that as a whole. And it's not new to us. A lot of the buzzwords, they come out and they're not exactly trendy, but they're well used, and again, they have specific meanings attributed to them, but we have been working towards these goals all along. We always want to improve the community for everyone, and so we enhance transportation. We look at community wellness and support the economy. We look at redeveloping and green infrastructure, land and infrastructure planning, all of the things that go into environmental justice pursuits. So then we have to look at it though of how does NAMPA align with the federal goals? How do we stay authentic to NAMPA, have resiliency, sustainability, and really move forward in an equitable manner? Touching on the question of, are there any restrictions or specific requirements that we have to meet? The answer is no. There are goals that they have in mind, but we are not making any commitments. In a point, there is commitment to, yes, we are going to reduce emissions through having better mobility through our corridors, decongesting the roadways will naturally provide that, but we're not saying we're gonna hit this mark and we're gonna put this regulation in place and that this is where we're going to like set a restriction for the community. It is just a like-minded goal that we are working towards. And so for transportation, that can look like several things. On your screen here, I have the ITS Technologies and our Traffic Management Center. That is economic, that is safety. Those are improvements that will help the community as a whole. Electric vehicle infrastructure is on the range of energy efficiency, and then there's also the congestion management, which again, that's where we kind of get into that emissions, and again, it's not regulations, it's more just that whenever you're improving the transportation network, you intrinsically have those reductions. And so we can count that. We don't have to make a commitment beyond that. It's kind of a natural thing, it goes hand in hand. And then multimodal and public transportation provides opportunities to people who don't have vehicles. And so then we're serving the disadvantaged population and helping them overcome those barriers to opportunity through providing alternative transportation options as well. I gave it its own slide because to me, the active transportation is probably the most important. It creates mobility through our community and also establishes a presence within your community where you see people, and if we're all walking around, we're kind of much more likely to engage with each other. I don't know about you guys, but I actually came in 2007 from Florida, and I had to learn how to smile and wave at people because we don't do that on the east side of the country. So it's very nice, the open community that we have, and I think all of our improvements kind of lead to building that sense of community. I digress. So for water resources, there is also water conservation and green space and public outreach, as well as emergency disaster preparedness. That could be for transportation or water resources, and many other opportunities there for council and the city. One nice thing we have is we have a pending grant right now that could potentially help get us some support for the Drought Task Force, get some workshops through ZAMZOs, and it's things like that that we want to bring to the community. Again, it's not making any commitments. It's not necessarily following what you first think of when you think of environmental justice and things like that, but it's things that speak to NAMPA. And that also includes our wastewater treatment plant upgrades and wetland improvements, irrigation storage ponds to help with drought resiliency and improve our systems. I think it's really important. We're an agricultural community. We're naturally invested in the environment around us. And so the funding, again, I welcome any discussion of the concerns over the topics and the buzzwords that they use. And I would love to hear your opinion of how you guys think that we could align with the federal goals as well. That was kind of the part I was looking forward to out of this, was getting your feedback on what you would like to see us pursue in relation to the community and what the needs are. And that's the end of it. So with that, I will stand for questions.
That was excellent. Thank you. So, council, feedback, questions, comments?
Oh, and I will say, if you guys would like, I have a handout with the Justice 40 information, as well as some QR codes with links so that you could just find it yourselves if you'd like.
Mayor, as I usually do, we are here part-time. You guys, professionals, are full-time. So you look at it inside and out, you look at all these things, the feds and so on. So, I mean, I would be interested, and I always put people on the spot with this, but what are your top 5? What would you like to see us spend our money on? What are the top 5?
My top 5?
Or would your team?
Well, I would have to give Crystal and Jeff the opportunity to
That's
say
fine.
theirs.
I'll allow Crystal. I don't know about Jeff, but
I have a top 2. We'll go with my top 2, because for me, it's the pathway systems.
okay. And I heard that. You know, thank goodness you are smiling. But what I've found, though, in the last 10 years, that Idahoans, even in Napa, are not looking at each other and smiling like they used to. So what do you think the reason for that? Do you think more pathways will help, or just people moving in haven't quite adjusted?
Community engagement, and I'm not sure, you guys have a great turnout on several things, but I'm not sure how to.
I noticed that even on NNU's campus. I'm kind of, I guess a little bit of assertive, but when a kid won't look up at me and say hi, then I usually, stop in front of them and say, they get quite shocked sometimes. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one, but the active transportation to me is important because when I drive, I'm often through that North Nampa neighborhood, the historic one between the railroad tracks and I-84, and I see the gentlemen who are amputees and they've driving their wheelchair down 11th because they can't get on the sidewalk, or they're dealing with the crossings that aren't necessarily flashing or have any indication other than a sign that there's a crossing there. So those moments really speak to me, and that's a goal of mine, is to really help the people who have those, they are disadvantages, but I don't necessarily think of them like that. But they just have a different set of needs within the community that I don't want us to just meet the minimum of. I would like us to strive for bringing them as much service as we can to get them around the community. And also, I think I was just talking about Stoddard Pathway with my husband, and we're like, when that goes to 2nd Street in downtown, we're in a good position. We could walk to downtown and not have to drive. And it would be a little while, but I know that there's several people in the community that are like, I would go miles on a bike or on foot if the connectivity was there. So I think that's very promising, that I think people would utilize it more and just get out a little bit more, not so sheltered in their vehicles or in their house. And then the other one, my second one, would be, I'm a proponent for community gardens and dryscapes, because kind of speaking to what Mr. Councilman Rodriguez said earlier, food is becoming expensive. And I keep thinking, well, man, if I could just buy a plot of property and put an herb garden in, then those are perennials that would come back every year. You wouldn't have to be like, oh no, I have to go buy oregano and it's so expensive. You could just go to your community garden and trim a little bit. And so to me, some type of service that created some more self-sufficiency within the community and provided those things would be great.
Are there grants available for the establishment of community gardens or any support for that?
There are small grants available, and I haven't looked into the cost of what it would be. And then, of course, Cody at Parks is, well, what does the maintenance look like on that, and how would we coordinate that Would there be volunteers? Would we make it a community garden and hope that people wanted to engage? There's a lot to be discussed there, and that one is outside of the realm of Public Works. It's just the personal answer that I had. The AARP Community Challenge one that we have been discussing internally right now does fund community gardens, I think $10,000 to $15,000. So that is an option. It again is just looking at, well, what does that look like for us long-term? How are we going to maintain the garden and things like that? So it would just require a little bit more dedication from the community, and I think we'd have to build that before we could build the garden, but it's a goal.
Thank you.
Crystal or Jeff, would you like to provide any priorities?
I would love to. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Lauren, thank you for this great presentation. You did an awesome job. Also, I want to thank Lauren because she helps keep me grounded sometimes when I start thinking only about cars, and she's like, hey, there's people too. So thanks for that. My main focus is through these, and not to steal somebody else's words, but one of my main priorities here is moving traffic and people in and through Nampa, right? So the projects that I'm going to more align to are capacity style projects that's going to intrinsically trigger some of these words. So you're going to see the carbon reduction, right? People aren't stopping and waiting in traffic. They're producing less smog. We're improving the environment. You're going to see capacity projects that build better sidewalks, build better pathways for the connected pathways to get people in and through. You're going to see streetscapes that align better with our master plan. So, you know, having the green on the side of the roadways instead of just curb and gutter. So my projects align towards capacity that, like I said, trigger a lot of these words. And we use that to help paint a picture saying why our needs are here. I would like to point out that through other funding mechanisms like ITD and LTAC and through the city and our impact fees, we do have opportunities to utilize that money for the enlarging the roadways, basically. One of the things that Justice 40 gives us is a way to come back and look at some of that aging infrastructure that is starting to fall apart and help us with those matches. So a great example, like Lauren pointed out, is that RAISE grant. That is in a historically disadvantaged community right there. The roads are starting to fall into disrepair. We've got a lot of connections and sidewalks that we wouldn't be able to connect without funding like this. So that's where my priorities align. Jeff?
Mayor, City Council, good morning. Lauren was doing this before she even had the job, by the way. She does such an outstanding job and is such an asset to the city. And $17 million, that's a record for Nampa. So anyway, I have three to cover. One is at the wastewater treatment plant. Capital is extremely expensive down there. So we have three big projects coming that could potentially fit within some of these upcoming environmental grants, and we'll keep them on the, one of them's on the list. One of them's Headworks, 25 million, the clarifier is 6 million, and then a boiler, which is 10 million. So all those are upcoming capital projects we'll keep on the list and keep our eyes open. And then the aging infrastructure grant, you hear a lot of conversations about aging infrastructure, but like Lauren said, it doesn't pinpoint. We haven't been able to use it like in our older part of downtown yet. So I think we need to keep looking at that. The older core part of downtown, from streets to water to pressure irrigation to everything, curb gutter, sidewalks, that is the most, that's our deferred maintenance costs lie within that area. It's just a huge amount of money. So I think just on the water and PI side, we're probably 100 million just in the core behind there. So anything on the aging infrastructure is huge, and we should keep our eyes open for that. And the last one is that surface irrigation improvements, like the ponds at the golf course and things, will help for drought mitigation. It will help provide water longer, and I think we can pursue grant. We're competing for several grants on that. So those are the three.
Thank you. Yes, Councilman Rodriguez.
So, Lauren, so what is the timeline on all these submissions still pending results? Are we looking 5 years, 10 years, or tomorrow?
In a way, they say that we're looking tomorrow, but they have been telling us on several of the results, they're like, oh, in a few weeks we'll release it.
Oh, really?
So I think that there's an influx of heavy workloads that weren't necessarily, I'm sure that they were planned for, but they weren't necessarily well prepared to actually handle. So some of the results were expected already and have been pushed, and I think that has to do with the capacity for them to really process awards. So there's been some unexpected lag on announcements, but they should all come within the next year. It's typically, well, for announcing of award and starting the coordination, it's typically within anywhere from 3 to 9 months from when we submit. And once you go through that process, if awarded, then you have to go through your contracting and agreement process. And that's where we bring it back to you guys at council to say, hey, we were awarded this money. Now we need to confirm that we're going to accept it. And we move through that contracting process. A lot of the federal programs would like to kick off within 18 months of award. So there's still a fairly quick turnaround of an expected 2 to 3 year turnover for kickoff. Some of the awards we get will be as early as the next fiscal year, but sometimes they get programmed out. So it's hard to say when we would actually get to utilize the funding.
So Mayor, on the 20.8 million submissions that have been submitted,
Those are the remaining submissions.
okay, so we have not submitted.
No, they've been submitted, but they're remaining to have results posted.
So do we know as far as how many require matching, from city matching?
Yes, so on the sheet there, the local contribution
So
column.
that's all the matching on the right-hand side here?
Yes.
Okay.
And so basically that is a summary of everything. All of those applications were put through for authorization through council in FY22 and submitted in FY22. Aside from, I think the ITS ones were a little bit mid-October.
Okay, so the bottom line is, if we are approved on some of these, then it comes back to council, and then we determine whether we have the funds to be able to match or not.
Yes. Oftentimes, we have already determined that in the sense that we work closely with our Public Works Finance Management team to determine that we have the budget, and we've already created a funding plan during the time that we were
Okay,
drafting the
and Doug is always
application.
included in that?
Well, Doug is the next step. First, we internally make sure that we think we have the money, and then we go to Doug to confirm that we have the money.
Right, so one of the local funding contributions are impact fees, and so that's why we have impact fees. And so for the streets ones that we're going after, that local contribution is the impact fee that is coming for our streets impact fee, so it isn't coming out of general fund, if you're concerned about that. And we have those funds.
Yeah.
So it's important if we go after a grant that we identify the match prior to applying, because if you apply for federal funds and then you don't use them, it's going to be hard to get them. Right, if we're granted the awards and then it's like, oops, we can't match that, so we can't do it. So you guys really go do the due diligence. And that's why it does come before council before we apply for them.
Where the grants align with projects that we're already doing, we already have a budgetary value for it, so that's the match, and then we get the grant to supplement it. So, yeah, but eventually it goes to the council through the budgetary process before any of it gets approved and received by the city.
And we do work with Doug prior to submission, so, and Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one more question for you, and I don't know whether you can answer this, but I'm going to have you direct me to. Is that we had a meeting at the Board of Trustees for the library yesterday, and one of the things that they're really concerned with is the camera system they have there. It's so grainy you can't even, you see people walking, but that's about it. So they wanted to work with the police department for a direct line with them, so in case something was to happen, of course, the PD would already know because of the camera systems, like similar to the ones at each intersection. So is there something somewhere we should go to look and apply, or, I mean, even working with the PD on their camera system, I'm just throwing it out there. Where do we go? Can be involved in this right here or not?
I don't have an immediate answer for you on that, because for Public Works to have anything to do with that, it would have to kind of tie into the tasks that Public Works
I see.
does. And security equipment wouldn't necessarily tie into any of our projects. I think tying it to the police department is a great idea, and there is always the potential that it could tie into our ITS technology work, and therefore would align with Public Works in the sense that it would contribute to almost like the smart city grid in a sense, and could be compatible with that and provide information back to, it's not just a traffic management center, it's also supposed to be an emergency management center as well. So I could see how that would tie into that, and I think there's definitely some arguments that could be made for it. What funding is available, I don't have an immediate answer for, and can certainly look into it and get back to you guys and discuss it with PD and library and everything. I would expect that there would be something, and that's just because, again, with the energy efficiency, upgrading to modern technology often provides some sort of argument towards energy efficiency, which is a part of those key goals that the federal government is trying to fund. So there, I do think there's potential there.
Did you hear me talking, Brad? Thank you, because I figured,
Thank you.
I got your attention, so I know they're working with the PD right now to figure out something, so, okay, thank you.
Lauren, thank you so much. I appreciate your presentation. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
For sake of time, I think that our next presenter is here, and this is our opportunity to go over the AARP livability report that you guys have been a part of. So, good morning.
Mayor, council members, Don Kostelek with Vitruvian Planning on behalf of AARP. I know we did kind of the council speed dating age-friendly discussion when we were here, so I think we met most of you except for Councilmember Bauer for about 20 minutes or so. So I hope you see some of the ideas that you have reflected in the report. A little bit of background on the overall effort. AARP, about a decade ago, started an initiative on age-friendly communities and livability. And really what they were seeing was a lot of factors within cities and even rural areas of difficulties of their membership base being able to age in place. And that relates to a lot of things. I think you heard some of those even in Lauren's presentations when we get down to sidewalk quality and curb ramps and pathways. That's one part of it, and you're all very familiar, and many of you brought up the issues related to not only housing affordability, but something we don't talk about is housing availability that I think just our region and our state are being pressured with. And so in developing the network of age-friendly communities and states, AARP wanted to start a national conversation and get cities to be thinking about age friendliness and what that means and working toward those goals. And in AARP's Idaho office then started a more concerted effort about a year ago to bring more communities into the fold. And Nampa was one of those. Today, Boise, Meridian, Nampa are the three larger cities. Malad, Preston, and Cascade were the three small towns. So there's kind of two different ends of the spectrum there. So what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? There's not really like thou shalt do this as a city or we have these expectations. They want cities to identify their own priorities and work toward them. And I think with what you just heard from Lauren's perspective, to use something like we've joined the network of age-friendly communities and oh, by the way, housing or transportation is a priority, hopefully that makes you look better in those grant pursuits and bolsters that case you're making for those types of things. So that's what we hope it will be used for, in addition to identifying in the next 4 to 5 years projects, programs, policies, plans, everything in that P realm that you see a lot as council members to look through that lens and understand it. So what you have here is a summary report of really a process that AARP hired us to do to help kickstart the conversation among new cities to identify a first tier of priorities within what are called the 8 domains of livability that AARP has identified. So between your inputs, the tour we did, as well with city staff leadership, department leaders, and then the Community Leaders Forum. I always get the name wrong, Mayor. I apologize. I've spent the last couple weeks trying to memorize that one specifically. Organized those groups and really came up with a lot of common themes. And what we have in the summary of the report on the first page is the housing issue, as well as transportation, and then community support and health services. And the interesting discussion on the community support, when we got down to things like food access and food pantries, and really talking about how the increase in costs for housing and transportation have impacted people's food security. So those things tend to be tied together. So what does all that mean? The mayor had the idea to reinvigorate the Healthy Impact Nampa Coalition to maybe be the sounding board for the age-friendly effort, and possibly within that group have a couple of subgroups that might address these areas. But that, again, is kind of up to you to go forward with and look at. Some detailed things we heard in those three areas that I think are opportunistic. One, on the housing front, Compass, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, just started a $100,000 study to do a regional housing coordination plan. And I know the firm that was chosen for that. You will get tons of data, and that's a good thing to try to understand. And I think what's important there is through, I think, Mayor, you're on the executive committee, one or two of you might be on the board. What other data might be advantageous to the city of Nampa? What other questions you have? Maybe they're going to answer them through that effort. Maybe it's something you find a way to tack on $5,000, whatever it may be, to get better data. But that effort is ongoing, and I would say use it to your advantage to get and understand these issues. The housing thing is a very complex set of public and private and market sectors, and if it were easy to solve, we would have found a way to do it by now. And so I think your partners that we've listed here and are already engaged can help you with that. I know, for example, St. Luke's in other areas, Wood River Valley, McCall, and even Twin Falls is very interested in the housing side of things because they're having trouble recruiting people to fill positions. We even heard a story in Twin Falls that they had offered a physician assistant's job to someone in Des Moines, Iowa, and significant pay and all of that. And when a person in Des Moines, Iowa looked at that job in Twin Falls and said, I just can't make it work on that, that's kind of indicative of the challenge that our employers and industries are having with that. On the transportation side, I think they talked about, I think you've put a lot of things in place in recent years to address some of the core transportation things. We realize those take time. What we heard more of from both your input and others is really about some of the basic access needs, especially of seniors in Nampa, and especially of kind of longtime residents of Nampa who are older that might not have the same means as older adults that have moved here in recent years. And so the transportation conversation was around access to basic things like groceries and prescription drugs and healthcare, as well as what you've brought up and mentioned in other forums about ADA compliance, and even connecting a pathway system that gives seniors a place to get out and improve their physical and mental health is all part of that. I do think there's opportunities with Valley Regional Transit and their new director, Elaine Clegg, much like I mentioned on the housing side, to get down to some more focused Nampa-specific needs and understand that dynamic. You see in the work trip flows graphic in there, we did that for Valley Regional Transit last year. And I think if you think of the old airline maps that you used to look at of where they fly, that's what we attempted to do with that graphic. But it just shows the mutual reliance and the kind of odd commute patterns that we have in this valley. And I think it's why things like transit and even transportation from a road capacity standpoint tend to struggle, because when you just look at everybody going hither and yon with that, we're a different society from a commute standpoint than we were years ago. But I think it's important to ask, what does that mean for Nampa? Which sector of Nampa's population is most in need, and help steer the resources and things through VRT to address that. I think that's well within your rights to ask for and go, especially with the new executive director over there. So those are some of the highlights. The third one on the community services, again, we heard great stuff from the Salvation Army, even hearing from the school district, you know, that they essentially have a grocery store sort of thing, of a food pantry and a clothes pantry and other things, and the services they're providing. And I just don't think those stories get told enough in terms of what your partners are doing in these realms that isn't related to city business. And we always encourage when you get together and maybe you reconvene this group, celebrate your success stories first and learn from them because you have them. So what's next? This was supposed to kickstart the effort. It's a 5-year commitment, and our hopes would be and AARP's expectations that a more detailed action plan, really refining these priorities and more specific ideas would come about toward the end of this year. And as I said, it's not the city's job solely to address some of these issues, but I think you can be a convening influence on that, and that's what AARP is looking for. I know AARP is also has asked me to develop some scope of work for support of age-friendly communities this year. So if the city is interested, there may be an opportunity for me to facilitate some of those discussions and refine that. And I would certainly love to do that. I've enjoyed working with the mayor and your staff on this. They've been wonderful and made my job easy. So hopefully I can bring you more content and stuff like this to help you further your goals. So with that, I know that's a lot. There's a 12-page report there to get you started. I'll certainly stand for any questions.
As we step into questions, while you're thinking of your questions, just a quick comment. First of all, it's been great to work with you. I've really appreciated it. What's awesome, too, is that Chris Stanley, who you partner, is your partner, was the one that did the initial City of Nampa survey, where we identified our census tracts and where we were and the direction we needed to go. So I love the continuity, because it isn't like this is just a one point in time we're jumping in and looking at something. It's actually based on an understanding. You really understand our community because you've been working in our community. And so for us to be effective long-term, it really takes that continuity. And so as you referenced our Healthy Impact Nampa group, for council, I don't know if you remember, there are subcommittees underneath that, a transportation subcommittee, housing, food insecurity, and the fourth one is really going to be focusing on mental health issues because it's a real need in our community. That particular initiative has kind of paused due to, one, not having a staff liaison to it, and then really needing to jump start it again. And so this is going to be, because the framework's already there, we've been meeting, we just haven't, through the pandemic, it kind of tailed off. It'll be a wonderful tool, I think, to take this forward. So really great information. But council, do you have questions? Yes.
So this is a great study, and I think
Could you turn on your mic? Thank you.
Sorry, I was like Darrell here on. So this is great information, but where's the meat and potatoes kind of thing? Where are we going with this? Is the city going to be able to obtain funds, or are you going to obtain funds and give it to us, or what?
The meat and potatoes is really that next detailed action plan. The goal of this was to kind of take the big idea, convene what we did over 2 days and go, okay, we've got a lot of consensus around these 3 topical areas that the city can work to define its own pieces. In terms of the actual funding, AARP, one, Lauren had mentioned the Community Challenge Grant that generally goes for smaller scale things like, the $15,000 to $20,000 range. So it's not going to fund your new park, your new greenway, things like that. But probably more importantly, with AARP's network of age-friendly communities and what they can tap into nationally on resources, if you saw some of the news reports in the last 6 months about Meridian's deeper dive on housing and stuff, that was funded by AARP as an outgrowth of this effort that we did last year to really bring in a more focused group of people. And I'm not saying that's exactly what you do, but I know AARP is willing to then gather the subject matter experts and others to come in and help you do a deeper dive on those types of things. And the goal with that, if I go back to the RAISE grant as an example, the analysis we did 5 or 6 years ago pinpointed a lot of the issues that even Lauren talked about with what the maps were showing, and I think that puts you in a great position to make that case for that funding. And our goal with this is, hey, we're pursuing a grant from whomever, but we're part of the network of age-friendly communities. It's an age-friendly priority, and the hopes are that looks better in a grant pursuit than if you're competing with another similar community and they don't have the same initiatives behind them.
So, and to further answer your question, a couple of things. We had a phone conversation, I think it was yesterday or the day before, on the AARP grant. Thank you so much for having it front and center before us.
Oh.
To consider, to look at, one of the things that we've talked about, what we're doing right now is the various areas of the city are coming together with some suggestions of grant ideas, and then we're going to prioritize what we think is most important. But a couple of things like the senior center meals, I'm not sure if that fits in the grant. A computer lab may, because they desperately need a room with new equipment, new computers, to where they can access some of their medical, because so much of the medical reporting and stuff is online. Transportation options, right? So those are things that we'll be looking at. But it isn't the responsibility of the city to always do all the work, but we serve in a wonderful capacity and opportunity to convene. And so that's where the Community Leaders Forum comes in. That's where this community health initiative, the Healthy Impact Nampa initiative comes in, because we have in the past convened all of the food distribution locations in the community to talk about food insecurity. We've talked about transportation issues. And I think that the city, it isn't that the city has the funds to fund things necessarily, but we can convene and pull our nonprofits together to make a difference in our community to ensure it's getting done, which is what we're doing on our emergency preparedness right now. It isn't that we do it all, but we have to have the plan in place to help guide and bring people together.
Well, that was what you just mentioned about the computers was the second priority that I was going to talk to you about. So
Okay.
Thank you for making that comment. So that's great.
And I think on that front, for example, and this is where even us being able to do this around Idaho, Malad, if you know where Malad is, near the Utah border between Pocatello and Tremont in Utah, Oneida County Library is winning like state and national awards, and one of the things they're doing is essentially computer literacy for older adults, and even and getting the grant to buy laptops, do the training courses. And for them, there's a rural broadband and other access issue going on that's tying it together. And so that's a way to bring those ideas into the fold here. And I will say on things like your Community Leaders Forum, I'm going to use that as ideas for other communities to bring a group like that together. And certainly in smaller places, that group will be smaller, but I was very impressed with that group's willingness to be involved and come to those things. They have ideas. They were energized about this, and I think maybe for some of that, another little kick of motivation that they can use moving forward.
One of the things that you're working on with the City of Meridian, which is the housing piece, a question that I've had in my mind is, what is the best practice? What is the right dynamic between single-family, multifamily? Where should we be? What is our current inventory? How do we get to that place where we're making decisions based on actual best practices and what we need? I do know that, and I'm trying to think who shared this with me, that one of the major developers that used to be 70% single-family, 30% multi, has totally flipped. Now they're 70% of multifamily development, 30% single. So there's been a huge shift, but who do we want to be as a community? I think those are really important questions, but we need to get to some good answers. And so I don't know seeing if we could apply for the grant and be a part of this next process of what Meridian's doing today, or if the information in Meridian would help guide us, not necessarily on the inventory side, but on the principles.
Yeah, I think that's where, at least, because the Compass studies to be done between now and September, a lot of numbers, but I think it's up to you to put your own context behind those numbers. And I think we did a 4-city housing analysis 3 years ago for Boise, Meridian, Nampa, and Caldwell. And a couple of things that stood out to me, to what you said, Mayor, the cost of land is what's really impacting the kind of product and things developers are doing. Even a builder like Corey Barton, that I think if you've been here 15 or 20 years, you think of them of kind of doing that, first home buyer thing, but because of the cost of land, they've moved away from that. The density thing of just making it pencil out financially because of those things comes with that. But what does that look like for Nampa? How do you meet the needs? I know you've had a lot of discussions about that. In our industry, we kind of joke sometimes it's not as much the density as it is the design of the density that kind of ends up being the thing when you drill down to it. Is that's what's going on? I don't know. That's for you to answer. Another one I know we heard from realtors is just the lack of rental units for families. Like once you get to the point of needing more than 3 bedrooms, that market becomes really, really constrained and really, really hard. And it's either a single family home somewhere and no real higher density to get to. And again, is that a Nampa thing? Those are the kind of things I think you could get at in that analysis, but you might have to work with Compass to ask some different questions. But if they're going out and doing those surveys and that analysis, the economies of scale there are great. So that's just where my ideas are with what I know is going on in the region.
Mary Kling. And one thing that we did, and the council doesn't know this, we had a meeting with the United States Department of Agriculture. And these folks were had a team meeting, and we met with them a couple weeks ago, right? And they were from Seattle, Denver, Washington, all over. And what we were discussing was just that topic right there, as far as multi-use facilities and apartment complexes, and how the government sees it from a different angle than we do, but they're willing to help and figure out where we can go as a city. So maybe that's something we should come to the council and explain what they're looking at us for, and maybe there might be some grants down the road for that. But yeah, I know we're going to have something for a meeting for the developers and the real estate agents. What, in March? Something like that?
Actually looking at some of the funding opportunities, some of the loans that are out there.
Right.
Especially for first-time home buyers, and
Right.
doing some education of our local realtors.
Right.
Coming together just to help them better understand and spread the word to the general population of what interest rates and what loans are available out there,
Right.
that they may be able to access a better interest rate.
And even some of the discussions we had in this group, this is just my exposure to other things, from, if we know the land piece is the issue, I know from experience in other places, does ITD have remnant parcels from projects from 30 or 40 years ago that are publicly owned but are kind of not being used? Do you work out a land trade? Do you work out some other things? Does the city have that land? Certainly within your urban renewal agency, you have the ability and goals with that, even within your comprehensive plan, to focus those things. And then it's getting to that level of creativity, but just knowing what your own context, conditions, your own political interests are in that front. And that's why I think you're different than Boise, you're different from Meridian, you're different from Caldwell. So work with your own solutions and find out what meets your population needs. Because I definitely heard in the discussions a very different conversation about housing and needs than even when we did this in Meridian last year. So while you look the same from a population and all the other standpoint, the dynamic, I think, is very different.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I do want to say, Crystal, could I have you help me take the lead with Compass on or we just need to figure out who's going to really focus in on that Compass study that's happening, and what ancillary information might be really beneficial outside of just streets. I know that you're over transportation, but there may be something broader that we need to look at. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
And I
because we
sent
need to
Rick the RFP from that just to know what's there. I think through your Compass role, you could probably get the scope of work and know what actually they're getting down to. It could be worth asking them to come give this body a briefing on what's there, so you can kind of get it straight from the horse's mouth and know what it is and what it isn't, because I don't know the details beyond what they asked for in the original solicitation.
Thank you. And Rick, you could share that RFP with Crystal, if you would, so that she's aware of exactly what's happening. Thank you so much. Really great job. I've appreciated working with you, and we'll continue to do so. So
We've enjoyed it, and hopefully we can do it more this year. And for anything else, I'm a nerd, I'm a wonk on this stuff, so questions, anything, don't hesitate to ask. I know Rick's been reaching out on ADA issues and other things. I like doing that. I like supporting our communities, and I like learning. Like I said, I'll take things I learned from the 2 days we spent here and bring it to other communities. So don't underestimate yourself for the work you're doing and how it's helping other places in that regard. Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is our legislative briefing. And it was so hard for me to hold my tongue when we were talking about some of the pathways, right? And the interest in pathways, because there's legislation out there that actually clarifies that certain transportation funding goes to traffic improvements, not to pathways. And so you can use it as long as it's not the primary use, but that's an interesting thing. So it may be a little more difficult in the future to fund any specific bike and pedestrian pathways. So anyway, as we were talking about that, I thought, we'll see if that's one that you land on today. I don't know if it's in, the group.
Not highlighting that too much, Mayor, but Mayor, Council, good morning. Mayor's referring to, there's some attempts to have some sideboard language around transportation dollars to go primarily. I think the legislative preference is to make sure that transportation dollars are dealing with motorized traffic. They do have some concerns that certain highway districts that I'll leave unnamed might prioritize bike lanes or other non-motorized traffic to facilitate that. And it's trying to balance the stakeholders up and down the state. There's a lot of districts that need money just to make sure that the roads are safe for motorized traffic. And it irks them if they see other highway districts trying to spend money on other things. So some of the sideboard language is to ensure that monies are primarily supporting motorized traffic. What the bottom line impact would be on how those dollars get spent on pathways, sidewalks. We had a meeting this week with the chairman, Palmer from House Transportation Committee in the House, and he assured us that as long as it's not the primary, I think as the mayor said, that if you're doing a sidewalk attached to a street build out, you'll find that more in an urban context, not in the rural context. So it's also underscores the challenge, the emphasis that you find in a rural versus urbanized infrastructure is going to vary. And so sometimes it's just educating the legislators and understanding that we're not trying to take transportation dollars and take out traffic lanes to add bike lanes. But I know that there are some advocates who want that and advocate for that. And there are people in other highway districts that might be prioritizing that. So I want to go through some of there's a lot going on. I counted there's about 104 bills in the Senate that already have a print. There's about 150 bills in the House. So we're at about 250 bills that have a print right now. Not all of them will get a hearing, but they're all in the hopper. And some are moving forward. Some are more what you would call personal bills that aren't going anywhere, but they get a print for the sake of the sponsor. The big three property tax bills, House Bill 77, 78, 79. There's a handful of other bills that deal with property taxes, not substantially, but these are the big three. And they're in a stalemate right now. They all reside in the House Rev and Tax Committee, which is chaired by Representative Monks. And as of today, none are scheduled on an agenda for a hearing. The legislature and the governor say that property taxes is a going home issue, meaning they're not going to go home and adjourn until they get something done on property taxes. That being said, none of the big three are scheduled currently, so I'm calling it a stalemate. Currently, the GROW bill does basically a credit, takes some of the sales tax revenue and sends it back to homeowners via a credit. Just a quick summary of that. The SCOG bill reindexes the homeowner's exemption to give homeowners more exemption to reduce their tax liability. And the Moyle-Monks bill is a little more complex. It takes some of GROW's ideas as well as money from schools and tries to package online sales tax, various revenue streams, packages it together and tries to offset the school bond levy piece of the property tax. This isn't additional money they're giving to school districts. It's just their existing bonds and levies would be offset by this. The benefit would come to the taxpayer. On average, in the state of Idaho, about a third of the tax bill goes to schools. If you're in the county, School districts are going to be a little bit higher as a percentage if you're in the city of Nampa like us. The city of Nampa taxes is roughly about half of the tax bill. And then the county and the school districts make up kind of the other half. That's just kind of roughly the case. So the school levy for someone who lives in the city would be a smaller percentage of the tax bill compared to someone who lives in the county, if that makes sense. I wanted to share a little bit of information about the SCOG bill because this has been the bill that the concerned citizens have worked on for 2 years. The mayor's convened legislators, each of the last few sessions, but a couple sessions ago in earnest, gathered and tried to educate our legislators on the tax shift that's been occurring as home values have gone up and as they've borne more of the brunt of the property tax distribution. Commercial has seen year-over-year decreases. That's generated by the levy rate. The levy rate about 6 years ago was 0.008 and change. The current Nampa levy rate is, and I'm sorry, this is really small, but 0.0030. Last year it was 0.0042. So the levy rate dropped. It's at an all-time low, at least in all the levy rates I've seen historically over Nampa's history as of the last couple of decades. The SCOG bill, a lot of people will say that they don't like the homeowners exemption bill because it's shifting taxes back to non-homeowners. I just wanted to show you for sake of education, working with the county, they did an adjustment to implement what the homeowners exemption in the SCOG bill, if it was implemented in the city of Nampa this year, if it was on the books, the levy rate would be slightly higher than 0.0030, it would be 0.0034. Okay, so the levy rate would be slightly higher because you're exempting more home value, but it would still be lower than last year. So when there's all this talk that this would be a radical shift back to commercial property, the levy rate still would have gone down this year over last year, even by exempting an extra $100,000 of homeowner exemption. All that to say, the average, this is just the city portion of the tax bill, on a $450,000 home. Currently, they get a $125,000 exemption. Their tax liability is $325,000. Multiplied by the current levy rate, this would just be the city part. The tax bill to the city on a $450,000 home would be $981 currently. If the SCOG bill was in place, $224,000 would be exempt. Remaining liability would be reduced by that, yes, slightly higher levy rate, but the tax bill would be $768. It'd be over a $200 cost savings just on the city portion. If you multiply that out by the county, by all of the taxing districts, it would be about a $400 savings on the property tax bill for a $450,000 home, which is about an average home. Now, that slightly higher levy rate applied to, say, the Walmarts and the commercials, their taxes would be higher under the SCOG bill than they otherwise would be. However, they would still be lower than they were last year. And I know that's a mouthful, it's sort of algebraic equation here, but there's this concern that their taxes would radically go up in order to accommodate this tax savings for the homeowner. We feel that it would stabilize. It doesn't even get back to 6 years ago distribution as far as homeowners versus commercial.
So Mayor, if I may, so Rick,
Yeah.
you have these figures. So who's lobbying? Who's pushing on this? I know you said concerned citizens, but also Canyon County is totally in favor of this.
Yeah, Canyon County is over there. I've been over the State House a couple times. Brian Stender was over there.
So are you meeting with
locals.
every committee person that has?
I haven't met with every committee person. I've tried to lock down our locals to keep them, especially our freshmen, Representative Cornelius, Roten, some of our incoming folks. They've reached out and we've sat down, had lunch and learns to kind of go over this data.
So with the Hogaboom crystal ball, what do you see? It was since the governor is saying, that no one's going home. So what do you see? I realize I'm not holding you to this, but what do you see as happening?
I think some version of the Moyle-Monks bill will get reworked. I just hear the governor doesn't like it as is. There's certain pieces of it. One thing that I'd say that I'm concerned about in the Moyle-Monks bill is Online sales tax comes in to what's called the property tax relief account. It does not come back to counties and cities through the normal shared revenue. So if you buy something at McDonald's or at Walmart, the 6 cents on the dollar you're paying, it goes to the state. 11.5% of that comes back to counties and cities through a distro formula. But when you buy something on Amazon, well, I need to clarify with the tax commission now, because I was told just a couple of weeks ago that Amazon might now be going into the sales tax formula because there's a nexus to the state. So, but if you do another online sales tax, say purchase of an item that is coming in from out of state, you're paying tax, 6 cents on the dollar. But that 6 cents does not come to counties and cities at all. It's funding what's called the tax relief account. What the Moyle-Monks bill does is it's going to try to keep in perpetuity that online sales tax to fund part of this offset that just goes really to a school bond offset. There's like 6 or 7 criteria that you would go through in order to offset the property taxes. It's more complex. To Moyle and Monk's credit on their tax bill, they do raise the homeowner's exemption from 125 to 150. It's fixed dollar. It's not the reindex that the SCOG bill would accomplish. What I hear is the ag community and commercial industry has some concerns about raising the homeowner's exemption because they like the low levy rates applied to their commercial properties that aren't going up year over year by as high amount. So they're benefiting from low taxes while homeowners are paying higher taxes. So they're afraid of what that shift back is. So I think it's really important to try to educate and show that yes, the levy rate would be slightly higher, but I don't think it would be punitive when you show that there'd still be a downward trajectory. So crystal ball, that's one piece. The circuit breaker in Moyle's Monk's bill, they lift the means test of a home that would disqualify you and lift it to, I think, 200%. And then they also adjust the poverty guidelines for qualification on circuit breaker. So to Moyle and Monk's, their bill touches on a handful of issues. It's more of an omnibus bill where it's touching the homeowner's exemption, that's a piece of it. It's touching the circuit breaker eligibility to be more generous in their bill. SCOG's bill is really a single item. It's just dealing with the homeowner's exemption. And Scott Grove's bill is really a single item, which is a redistribution of sales tax only, while still allowing the online sales tax to sunset. So going back to the whole online sales tax, SCOG bill and the Grove's bill, they're not trying to keep the online sales tax in perpetuity to fund property tax relief. They would let that sunset, go into the distribution formula in a year, and then the cities and counties would see increased revenue because that online sales tax would finally start coming to us. Monk's Moyle's bill, one thing that they do to fund in perpetuity is to not sunset the online sales tax. So that means cities and counties would not be seeing a benefit from that directly in our funding line. So
you do not see the possibility of integrating SCOG's indexing into the Monks and Moyle aspect?
What I'm hearing is 150 is the hard limit. 125 to 150. They're concerned about home values going down, and 150 would stay fixed. Again, there's just a lack of understanding over there. The index would also move down. If home prices go down under the SCOG bill, the index would flex and adapt with the home value. That's the whole point of an index, is it has a built-in adjuster relative to what the housing market is. So that the property taxes, just stay tuned. Right now none of the 3 bills have a committee hearing, and it is a going home issue. So I think hopefully, House Bill 389 a couple of years ago, that all came together at the very end and very quickly. Fortunately, none of these bills directly harm cities in the way that House Bill 389 did. I'd say the Monk's Moyle bill has the most potential harm in that they're not going to let the online sales tax come back through the distribution formula. So All right, I want to talk about House Bill 132.
Rick?
Yes.
What I heard they were going to do is what Moyle did last year. He just, the last couple of days, he'll throw it out. I hope he doesn't do that again.
Yeah, I think there's some tight-lipped negotiations going on to try to cut at the margins on the Monks-Moyle bill. That's my guess, is that, yeah. If there's going to be single item bills to deal with circuit breaker and all that, you would have prints on those as standalones right now, and there aren't any. So that's a little bit of a concern that it's going to be an omnibus bill. But you're not supposed to get too complex with the legislation. It's supposed to be a single subject intent in legislation in the State House. It all has a nexus to property taxes, and that's why they're maybe being a little creative with trying to touch on a handful of things that all have a nexus to property taxes. Monks-Moyle bill, the fact is they know that there's some in the body who want the homeowner's exemption to go up. House Bill 389, it was take it or leave it. That was the only way the homeowner's exemption was going to go up from 100,000 to 125. And you basically had to hold your nose and take all the bad things in the bill. And so a lot of legislators, told us, well, most of our locals voted against it, but some who voted for it said, yeah, House Bill 389 really stunk, but it was the only way to get the homeowner's exemption up. Well, that's by design from a negotiation tactic, that the people who are in charge of what bills get heard in committee, they know that there's 20, 25 members in there that want homeowner's exemption to go up. And they're not going to do a standalone to just move the homeowner's exemption, because it would get passed as a standalone, and then you'd lose any leverage to get other things you want passed by trying to pull it into their bill. So that's just politics. That's what we call it, politics. So House Bill 132 is a new bill that was printed by, and I'm sorry, I'm going to move on, but if you have any questions at the end, I want to get through some of these items, and I'm available offline as well. House Bill 132 is a new strategic initiatives grant program bill that Representative Palmer, chairman of the House Transportation Committee, has proposed in collaboration with the governor. The governor in his State of the State said $100 million he wanted prioritized to go to locals based on impacts associated with state-related infrastructure, notably transportation infrastructure. So you take I-84, for example. When I-84 is built with lots of state money, there's local roads that tie into that are not under ITD jurisdiction. They're under local highway jurisdiction, Ada County on one side, Nampa Highway District, City of Nampa on the other. There's going to be impacts on our local roadways to accommodate the capacity, the volume that's going to be coming in through State Highway 16. So House Bill 132 proposes that monies are divided in a 50-50 split between rural and urban to be administered by ITD to go through sort of a competitive grant program to fund programs, or fund, I should say, projects that are directly tied to impacts associated with state infrastructure. There's a potential split of 100 million, 50 million that would come to urban, and 50 million to rural. I wanted to show our team has done a great job. Crystal, Tom, Mark Stewart, and also Nick from Nampa Highway District. We've had 2 meetings. We had one meeting with Speaker Moyle a couple weeks ago. And this past week, we had a meeting with Representative Palmer. And the bill that just got printed by Palmer would help our needs. We're not, so just letting you know, there's not an appetite to do a direct allocation specific to the needs that we articulated in the spreadsheet. They said that this bill is intended to provide ongoing appropriation of monies that would be administered through ITD to help fund exactly the type of things that we brought into those meetings, which is costs associated with getting our infrastructure up to where it needs to be in order to tie into Highway 16. So if you look at the spreadsheet, no, it's a little small. Widening Franklin to 5 lanes from Robinson to McDermott, signal at Franklin and Dermot, Whiting, Ustick, roundabout at Canada and Ustick, roundabout at Cherry and Idaho Center, roundabout at Star and Ustick. So some of these monies are already being collected from impact fees to deal with some of these growth projects that were already anticipated. But now with Highway 16, it further accelerates the need and the capacity demand on this infrastructure. And I know Crystal and our Public Works team can speak more specifically if you have any questions on these local impacts. I'd be happy to sit down and kind of show you the rationale, the justifying rationale that we were bringing into the meetings to say, you look at what the net local impacts are, and you have a net local impact of 26 million. We try to show them what the time frame would be in construction with or without assistance. And you can see that there's a delay in the projects if we don't have the monies. We have to go with what monies we have. If the state, through ITD, apportions this money, we can expedite the projects. So this was a good faith attempt to articulate to them. Part of this is because some monies were allocated for Ada County Highway District, and I won't go into long details on the how or why of that. It happened. And it's been held up, but 36 million is gonna go to Ada County Highway District to deal with their side of 16. So you just need to know, we were coming to the table to say, okay, what about us? Especially since Highway 16, the southerly part, is literally in Canyon County and in our impact area. And Rodney and team has done a great job, of course, doing the specific area planning around 16. It's having a significant impact on us. And if they want us to tie into 16 safely and efficiently, they could build a nice, big, shiny thing, but it costs a lot of money for us to tie into it in a way that's efficient. So that's a big price tag, $26 million. And so Nampa Highway District's been at the table with us, and they've appreciated kind of this collaborative lobbying efforts at the State House. But to be clear, we're not gonna get a direct distro, but House Bill 132 is probably the best thing moving forward that adds new monies above and beyond, not taking from another pot and redistributing, but new monies. The state has a huge surplus. So the governor wanted to prioritize that out of that surplus, that there would be monies distributed to locals based on impacts associated with state infrastructure. I'll skip over this letter, but we have a memo letter that we are hoping to get over. Today, they actually have a committee hearing this afternoon at 1:30 in the House Transportation Committee. I anticipate it to move forward to the House floor. It is the governor's one of his top priorities is this funding for transportation funding to locals. So Senate Bill 1079. So with the time remaining, there's some bills that have a more direct impact to you all as electeds at municipal officials. Senate Bill 1079, Senator Groh brought this bill. There's some news starting to be generated. I think Amy captured one in the media monitoring that she just sent out earlier this morning. You can read more about that. There's an article, but they've attempted this in the last few sessions in a row to try to move municipal elections to even years. So you just need to know that this has been an ongoing effort. And mostly there are some partisan motives behind it. The Republican Party, at least certain local Republican parties, have supported the idea of moving city council elections, consolidating them to even years. And of course, presidential, statewide, county, all of those elections occur on an even year cycle. For about 100 years, Idaho, through statute, said municipal elections are on odd years. So we're on off-year elections, and the reason that we're off years, it distinguishes your elections from the federal, state, and county elections, which are all partisan, and city council races are nonpartisan and on odd years. So that line, there's a distinguishing line between the two. Some of the pros of consolidated elections, at least that they're arguing, is that it would save money. The county clerk does not have to administer more elections in the off years. So statewide, they'd say hundreds of thousands of dollars would be saved by not having to run the municipal elections if you're down ballot on even years with a lot of stuff stacked on those ballots. The turnout is higher in those even years, so the thought is that you're giving people more bang for the buck, I guess, and showing up to vote, especially if they're going to wait an hour or two in line, that at least they're getting a lot done. So those are kind of the biggest arguments for moving to even year. The arguments against, and again, I'm just summarizing, there's more pros and cons, but these are kind of the main arguments the concerns that are being expressed. Local elections are nonpartisan and on odd years to be distinguished from the even year partisan elections at federal, state, and county levels. Trying to compete for attention down ballot when millions of dollars are spent on top ballot races will be challenging. Local elections deserve their own election cycle for sake of community education and focus on local issues. So that's been the rationale and why local elections have been kind of on an odd year cycle, because they deserve their own they deserve their own spotlight on local issues to not be crowded out by the billion-dollar industry now in advertising and marketing that is spent at the federal, state, and higher levels. So I maybe just to pause here. I don't know if Mayor, you want to have a very brief. There's about 5 minutes left on this, but this Senate bill is printed. It's likely going to be heard in committee, and I just want to inform you of its ramifications. Primarily, I skipped over the second point. Senator Groh in his bill, in order to align elections to even years, would actually add a year to all of your terms. So you just need to know that that's in his bill. That has a direct impact on all of you if his bill were to pass, that there would be no elections this fall. The elections would be delayed to 2024. And then the 2025 election cycle would be delayed to 2026. So it would just be an additional year. I don't know what the legality is if you were elected to a 4-year term for the state legislature to just come in and say, we are just adding a year to it. Have not engaged. I have not seen an attorney general weigh in on this or whatnot. The other alternatives in the last 2 years was to force the election cycle to be 3-year terms the next time you would run. This fall, a 1 or a 3-year cycle, and then get to an even year and then stagger 4 years beyond that. And that was kind of last year's version, which was a little bit complicated. Groh's bill just says, let's just add a year to everyone, and then they're just up for election in even years. So
Council, do you have any comments or thoughts on this? I don't know that it's one of those that we would take a position as a city. I think everybody would possibly have the opportunity to independently choose to stay neutral, to say something, to not say anything. Any comments, thoughts?
It's not on my top priority list.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay.
I have to say, for me personally, the concern that I have is that when you're running for a city council seat, or let's say the mayor's seat, and you're doing it during a gubernatorial race and a presidential race, there is so much media in the market that it would be very difficult. I'm concerned that the city council races and the local government races get lost, and that people go vote because you have higher voter turnout, but they're less educated. And that this gets turned into a partisan election. And I feel strongly that the mayor's seat and the council seats should not be partisan. It could be that they want to know what the affiliation is, which I don't care, but we shouldn't have primaries, and it shouldn't be partisan, because the issues that we deal with predominantly are budget, transportation issues, other issues that are less partisan issues. And I think it's important that we I don't know, I'm just really concerned about, and probably my big one is running against or during the same year that you've got a governor's race and a presidential race, because it's so hard to get through the noise of the election to have an educated voter base. However, with city council now by district, where you're not voting the entire city, it's much easier because you can walk your district. So that helps. On the mayor's side, it'll be a little harder because the mayor's race will be up against those other races, and it just getting the word out. It'll be more expensive is what it'll be, which is unfortunate, because trying to get the word out will be much more expensive when it's a citywide race. But The advantage would be we would have another year before we would have to go to districts.
Yes.
So that'd be a great thing, right? So,
It would
I don't know.
Give us a year for more education, but.
yeah.
Great, I was like, Darrell, one more year.
One more year.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I think that's good. That's good feedback, and I know I'm short on time. I wanted to quickly touch on a handful of more, and then I'll stay after if you want to chit chat real quick. Senate Bill 1073 is Lakey's. It's the comprehensive area of impact bill. He did bring it forward, and we're keeping an eye on that. And I've reported on this before. If you have any further questions on it, we happy to answer those. I want to touch quickly on a couple other items that directly affect mayor and city council races. There's been a couple scenarios in the history of Idaho where city council members resigned en masse and eliminated a quorum, and it became impossible to appoint new council members because you have to have a quorum to confirm new council members. So this is just very quick. A bill that, if that were the case, the governor would appoint up to the quorum, and then the mayor would then appoint the remaining members to get to the full seated members. So if you see that bill, I'm happy to answer any questions on it. Human trafficking is a high priority for Nampa PD. I know Lieutenant Kimball has been working this with Representative Crane and SCOG. There is a hearing scheduled Friday, and I know Mayor intends to testify. So wanted to give you an FYI on that. The fentanyl bill that was also a high priority, unfortunately, was not passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation last week. And that was to add fentanyl to the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. But human trafficking is up Friday, so that's just an FYI that the mayor will be testifying. Two other quick bills. You know, county and Doug Racine can speak very briefly to this, but there's been a dispute around the state about counties wanting to hold the late interest fees and penalties associated with late property taxes that they collect and not distributing those back to the cities. In our case, we have received those funds, and I forgot, Doug, you sent an email yesterday how much it was, like $200,000 or something?
Yeah, there are two components. The late delinquent property taxes amount $400,000 to $600,000 per year, and we get that every year. There's no question on that. The penalties related to those delinquent taxes range from $170,000 to $250,000 per year.
So that's what we get, but the county is informing us that there's a dispute that the county might want to hold that penalty money and feel that they deserve to hold that money and only remit to us just the actual tax amount and to keep and pocket that money. So this legislation is supposed to provide some very clarifying language that the county should not be holding back that penalty money, that it should be going back to the taxing districts. The counties already have a provision to charge an administrative fee at the point of collection in which they can keep for the sake of a cost recovery, but they shouldn't keep the associated penalties. So to our $200,000 less would be coming to us out of that penalties. And of course, and I think Doug says we don't depend on that. You shouldn't depend on penalties. That's bad budgeting practice because it becomes creates a perverse incentive to lean on that. But that is a significant impact, and there's a lot of communities for which the county holding this money back is not good. And then there's one other bill that's working its way through. This is the last one I have, which is to raise, you know how there's procurement policy on when we have to go to competitive bids and the limits. There's a bill that's intended to raise those limits to account for inflation. And it would keep 50,000 as the limit for public works, but it would raise the personal property up to 75,000. In other words, you don't have to bid unless it's up to 75. You can make the case it should be a little bit higher. It's been a fixed dollar for a long time. But this would actually expedite the purchasing procurement for local units of government that just feel that there's so many things based on inflation that hit that limit. You have to go through the competitive bid process. And of course, that's to ensure taxpayers get good value for their dollars, but it can delay procurement and the cost of goods actually go up in the bidding process. That would be the downside. So if you're buying something that costs less. So that's the report out, and I know I'm over time, and I will be happy to answer any questions offline.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. So he will be available afterwards. I asked Carrie to come in. And Carrie, I'm so sorry, Carrie does not like to celebrate birthdays, like keep it quiet, and I'm sorry. I just wanted to say happy birthday to Carrie today and Amy on Saturday. We have 2 birthdays, right? Isn't it Saturday? No, it's next month, but I appreciate it. I'm looking at my calendar, I thought it was like 3 days behind Carrie. It's next month. I messed up.
They're just the same age, right?
So, actually, I think you are, aren't you? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, just a month. No. Anyway, happy birthday to Carrie. Yeah, appreciate her in our office.
Mayor,
Yes.
totally off the subject and another time, but, we've seen some of our emails and so on, and I just really, my personal opinion, but I would hope the city and the council would want to support our blues. To me, we're having some real challenges with keeping the bad guys incarcerated. And I would like to hear more about that, whether it's from Chief Huff or Captain Daniels or whoever the case is, but how we best as a city can support, and I'm sure there's some other, factors, county and so on, but we got to protect our citizens.
Are you referencing some of the editorials and some of the press releases that have been
Well,
done based on the judges and
I was, we have
prosecutors?
even Sheriff Donahue was involved with what surprised me a little bit with the letter, but the municipalities, where the chiefs are coming together and saying, hey, our guys are and gals are putting their lives on the line, and then no one's telling us, but these bad guys, we're seeing them again here a few weeks, after we lock them up, so.
Same day, they get
Well, and like the fentanyl bill, not moving forward.
But anyway, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, I think we need to, our voice should be heard and
I
our
could bring him
citizens
to our-
know that we're concerned about it.
Would you like him, staff report at our next council meeting on Tuesday night? Okay, we'll do it.
I think we should have Brian
you.
Taylor present.
Well, I don't know that we'll do that, but we will have Chief Huff provide a report on Tuesday night.
Okay, that's a
Okay.
good idea.
Any suggestions how we can support?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I'd stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All